So we were warned about an armed man named Dred Scott. If Dred Scott's a citizen, then that means he gets the right to the Second Amendment. He's going to be armed. He's going to be walking around with a gun. You want a black man with a gun? The Dred Scott decision, one of the worst decisions in American jurisprudence, was also a blow to the Second Amendment. If the NRA wants to actually show the world that they believe in the Second Amendment, then they should defend black people being armed with, shotguns, pistols, what have you. The Second Amendment reads that, we all get to have guns. We all have an individual right to own guns. That's what the Second Amendment means. Now, in Colorado, we have an additional Section 13. So we got the Second Amendment on our side, and we got a Bill of Rights from the state constitution. The right to bear arms. The right of no person to keep and bear arms in defense of his home, person, and property, or in the aid of the civil power when thereto legally summoned shall be called in question. But nothing herein contained shall be construed to justify the practice of carrying concealed weapons. So you can't have carry concealed, but you can have weapons to defend your person, that stand your ground, defend your home, that's castle law, defend your property. And you have a right to bear arms in the aid of the civil power when thereto legally summoned. So when the sheriff comes and deputizes you, regular Joe citizen, to be part of his posse comitatus, you're allowed to carry weapons in too. So not only do we have the Second Amendment with the U.S. Constitution, here in Colorado we also got the additional 13, Section 13, which is brilliant because we don't really need the Supreme Court cases. They had Supreme Court cases that said, the Second Amendment, which reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Let me read that again. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That is an individual right for every individual American citizen in this country. The right of the people to keep and bear arms. You cannot infringe upon it. In Colorado law, you can't even question it. And the whole well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, that means the people can organize themselves into a militia. Therefore, the people have a right to keep and bear arms. It's redundant. We have an individual right to protect ourselves in our own home, for our own person and property in Colorado, but the Second Amendment says that we have an individual right to keep and bear arms. Colorado, they prohibit gun registration. CRS 2911.7-102 is updated 2016. A firearms database is prohibited. You cannot have a firearms database in Colorado. Colorado prohibits machine guns, short shotguns, and short rifles. So they do ban some weapons, right? Machine guns, short shotguns, and short rifles. No need to have a permit for open carry if you're an American citizen. Then you have a right to carry a pistol in your holster anywhere that you go. Subway, Walmart, go to the local farmer's market. You're allowed to have a pistol, rifle, shotgun. At the very least, those are what the liberals, Eric Swalwell, says you have a right to pistols, shotguns, and rifles. NFA weapons restrictions, nope, not in Colorado. CRS 1812-102. Peaceable journey laws, yes sirree, Bob, 1812-105.6. Castle Doctrine, yes. CRS 18-1-704.5. Colorado's Castle Doctrine begins like this. Use of deadly force against an intruder is okay. The General Assembly passed this. and they believe that Colorado citizens have absolute safety, absolute security in your own home, notwithstanding the provisions of Section 18.1.704. Any occupant of a dwelling is justified in using any degree of physical force, including deadly physical force, against another person when that other person has made an unlawful entry into the dwelling, and when the occupant has a reasonable belief that such other person has committed a crime in the dwelling in addition to the uninvited entry, or is committing or intends to commit a crime against a person or property in addition to the uninvited entry, and when the occupant reasonably believes that such other person might use any physical force, no matter how slight, against any occupant. Anybody who uses deadly force against an intruder, as described above, shall be immune from criminal prosecution for the use of such force, and they shall be immune from civil liability for injuries and death resulting from the use of such force. Dwelling does not include prison cells, so therefore prisoners in jail do not have castle doctrine. Castle doctrine says if a person is in your house and they're going to commit a crime, have already committed a crime, in addition to breaking and entering, they're going to rob, rape, attack. If you just believe it, if you just assume it, that they intend to commit a crime, why are you in my house at 2 in the morning? And it says no matter how slight, so you're in my house, looks like you're going to use physical force, just a little tiny slap, no matter how slight, any physical force. So very much against unlawful intrusion and violence and home invasions. Very against home invasions. There's a castle doctrine in Colorado. So you have the major landmark D.C. v. Heller decision. This is the District of Columbia, 2008. D.C. v. Heller. The hell, I say, the heller. A person who hells is a heller, right? So D.C. v. Heller, a weak 5-4 decision, but it's like Roe v. Wade, it's right. The Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to possess a firearm unconnected with service in a militia and to use that arm for traditionally lawful purposes such as self-defense within the home. D.C.'s handgun ban and requirement that lawfully owned rifles and shotguns be kept unloaded and disassembled or bound by trigger lock violated this guarantee. The right to bear arms is not unlimited. Gun regulation would continue. But D.C.'s handgun ban was overturned, and the requirement that lawfully owned rifles and shotguns be kept unloaded and disassembled or bound by trigger lock. That only stops a person being able to defend themselves at the moment that they have to defend themselves. Guns are a right for self-defense for one's own home. That's what D.C. v. Heller, the Supreme Court case 2008, D.C. v. Heller said the Second Amendment no longer is it just about the militia. Now it's about the individual American's right to own a weapon, a gun, a pistol, a shotgun, rifle, something they can keep in their arms in order to defend themselves in their own home, and in Colorado for defense of their own person and property. So it's a landmark Supreme Court case. Now afterwards, we're going to find out if the federal courts are going to uphold this interpretation of the Second Amendment. And they do. John Roberts Court, 2010, McDonald versus the City of Chicago. This again was a weak 5-4 decision. Alito, Roberts, Scalia, Kennedy, and Thomas concurred. Stevens, Breyer, Ginsburg, and Sotomayor dissented. McDonald v. Chicago. McDonald v. Chicago 2010 said that the Second Amendment can be protected by federal court via the 14th Amendment's due process and privilege and immunities clause. So that would presume the First Amendment. You can go to a federal court to get your First and Second Amendment upheld. That means all of our rights and freedoms in the amendments in the federal Constitution ought to be protected in the federal courts. So the First and Second Amendment are protected, then they all ought to be. But that's a landmark. 2010 McDonald v. Chicago. Supreme Court said that the states cannot restrict the right of the ownership of handguns for self-defense. Second Amendment protects a person's right, individual right, to keep and bear arms for self-defense in one's own home. It was Otis McDonald. Otis McDonald had a handgun in Chicago. The city banned it, but the Second Amendment did not. Second Amendment is individual self-defense. Second Amendment says that we have an individual right to self-defense as a central component of the Second Amendment. Now, the 2008, 2010, the D.C. v. Heller and McDonald v. Chicago subsequent case are one of the few Supreme Court cases that ever addressed the Second Amendment. One of the first cases was 1939. So for about 80 years, they hadn't talked about the Second Amendment. In 1939, you had U.S. v. Miller. And that's when the Supreme Court addressed the Second Amendment, and they said that sawed-off double-barrel shotgun ban, you can ban sawed-off double-barrel shotguns. That's okay. That's fine and dandy. So they actually said, anyways.